Hi, I'm MSC Pro and welcome to my SwiftUI video. Today we'll be talking about making a form in SwiftUI. So that will include various aspects including TextFields, pickers, PhotosPicker, navigation, buttons, and many more. So this is actually part of my upcoming Udemy course on the complete tutorial on making iOS app using SwiftUI. So make sure to subscribe and follow me on Twitter, and I'll be posting coupons when the course is published. So we're gonna have a sign up form. The first section is a profile image, so you can click this button to show the system image picker. And of course, this is a privacy preserving picker because it doesn't request any photo picking permissions. So we can pick a picture and then it will display it as a rounded picture here. In the next section, we're gonna have a username. Notice that there's a check for the username conditions. So minimum 5 characters. So if I type less than 5, this is red. If I type more than 5, this is green. It also checks if it contains alphabets, numbers, or underscores. So if I use some other characters like an @ mark or like a code bracket, it will show red here. I also have a password, so right here we can enter a password using a SecureField. As you notice, we have a button that can hide or show the password. There's a password verify and there's a check on password security. So if we type one more character, you can see it's animated, so it will show how secure or how we met the requirement. Also notice that the submit button on the top is only enabled if the password and username check is valid. We have a picker, which allows you to pick, for example, in real life scenario, you can pick a country, you can pick a state, you can pick a city, or a gender, etc. So this is a picker. We also have a date picker, so this is very useful for picking date of birth, or for example, reservation date, something else. And there's a description, so basically this is multi-line, so if you type a lot of content, it automatically jumps to the second line. And this is using the newest text field with access in SwiftUI iOS16 version. There's a toggle, and as you can see, and there's a slider. So this slider only allows you to pick integer values, so you can go from 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you can submit a form. So this video is using the newest version of Xcode and iOS 16, I believe 16.3 or 16.4 SDK. So if you follow along this 1 hour long video, you will learn how to design a same form like this from zero in SwiftUI. So let's get started. This is a form, so we can use the form view component. This will provide a beautiful rounded cornered list within our view. So what's the first component that's required for a form? Well, let's start with a username. So we're gonna create a variable to store that. So for example, see username. By default, it's empty. Now let's create a new section. So now within form, you can put different sections. So for example, this is the username section, right? And then we have a text field, for example, username, and then let's put a username here. So now you can see we have this displayed on the right shortly, and you can type some alphabets, numbers, and underscore. Okay, all right, so now we need to check this value not only during when the user submit, because you don't want the user to fill out all the information and then discover that their internal information is invalid. So what you want to do is you want to check if this value is valid when the user types it. So this is a great use case for onChange. So what onChange does is that when this auth variable changes, it calls this function with the newest value of that variable. So for example, we can say on change of username, we can check this new value if this new value is valid. So now I did prepare a function that checks whether the string contains alphabets, numbers, and underscore only. So let's get this function right here. Paste it. So it's very simple basically, because we are only dealing with alphabets. They're only like such a limited number of this, so we can actually enumerate all of the cases of lower cases, upper cases, and numbers and underscore. So this function checks if this is a valid string. So right here, what we're gonna do is that we're gonna check it. So let is valid, equal to, first of all, we have the count. So new value of count has to have minimum 5 characters, so larger than or equal to 5. And we also check for this is valid string. So we process this new value input. And then basically, if it's valid, we are gonna do nothing. But if it's not valid, we're gonna display an alert to the user. So if not is valid, well, we need to update the UI with an alert. So let's create a new variable. Let's call it, for example, username invalid, right? Like a Boolean value, and initially it's false. So now we do need to set it to valid once the user corrects it, right? So this basically becomes username valid, or is username valid, right? By default, it can be false, because by default the user doesn't type anything, so the length doesn't meet the requirement. And we assign is username valid with the value of is valid. Now, if the username is not valid, what we can do is we can change this footer. So for example, let's do a label here, and let's use an inline if statement so that we can change the color and the system image of this label displayed at the footer. So basically, if the username is valid, right, question mark follows the true if true. So if it's valid, I want to show a check mark. And if it's not valid, so these are SF symbols. You can review that in the image video section if you forget about it. So if it's not valid, we show an X mark. Now we also want to change the color, so let's do a foreground color view modifier, and also let's do an inline if statement. So if username is valid, we show it as green. If username is not valid, we show it as red. So as you can see, now it displays as a red string, and as we type longer, it meets the requirement. We can also highlight only part of the string by using a plus character. So let's practice this right now. So what we can do is we can, instead of doing this, we can have an additional variable called is username length valid, right? And then we can have a username format valid, right? Initially it's true because there's no format checking. So now what we can do is we can do a VStack, right? Let's do a leading alignment. So what we're gonna do is we can have two of these. So for example, one checks for the format and one checks for the length. So basically right here, so is basically right here we set self dot is username length valid equal to new value dot length or count is larger than or equal to 5, and is username format valid, we set it to is valid string. So now this is a check for minimum character count. So minimum 5 characters is length valid, right? It is length valid, and we can also put a here. So has to so alphabets, numbers, and or underscore, right? And then we do a format valid, right? Here we go. So if we have met the length requirement, it shows green on the length. If we have invalid format, it just shows that on the X. One more thing that's interesting is you can also use a plus mark to concat different strings. So for example, we can have a length check with a foreground color that's based on the length, so length valid. Right, length valid. If it's valid, show it as green. If it's not valid, show it red, and then a plus mark, and then maybe and format check. Right, you can have a foreground color that's set based on format. So format valid. If it's valid, we show it as green. If it's not valid, we show it as red. So bingo, you can have a single text concatenated with different foreground colors based on the if condition. Right? I still like the other style because it shows the user clearly what is right, what is wrong. So that is the username. Now let's move on to password. Password entry, right? So here, we will have a password section. So usually on web form, you will create a password and then retype it. Although I have to say, working on the server side, recently passwordless is very common. So for example, FIDO2 standards and etc. So yeah, just a random talk. So in the password, you can use what is called a secure field. So secure field basically displays the dots when you enter the password. So here we can have, for example, password, right? So this is password entry. And then usually you want the user to retype it so that you can check it. So let's do a password re-entry. Right? And then we can just basically copy and paste this again, but this is like a verify. Okay, so and then we can have a password re-entry right here. Okay, and then now we're gonna check. So if right password entry, so if not password entry is empty, so that means the user has typed something within the password field, and maybe not password re-entry is empty, or we can just compare it directly. So does not equal to password re-entry. We can show a label. So for example, password confirmation does not match. We can provide a system image, for example, X mark circle, and then the foreground color can be red. So as you can see right now, if I type something in the first field, it shows does not match, or I can only perform this check if both of them. So basically what's happening here is SwiftUI calculates this if statement whenever this variable changes. So it's totally automatic. Whenever this variable changes, it decides whether to show this view or not. So I can do like enter some test, and then I can enter test. And now you can see it works. So I also want to add a button for the user to show the password when the user really wants to check it. So show password, you go to false initially. So what we can do here is basically if show password, we can display just a regular text field, right? So password entry. Otherwise, if the user requests not to show password, we can just display the secure field. And what we can do is we can add a switch on the right side here. So it's left and right. What kind of alignment is this? Horizontal or vertical? It's horizontal, and we should use an H stack. So let's put an H stack here. The text field is here, and then we put so this is basically the text field, right, to type password. And this is the button to show or hide the password. Okay, so we can have a button, right, that basically toggles whether we show the password. So what toggle does is if the original bool value is true, it sets it to false. If it's false, it sets it to true. So we can add a label here, and I remember there's like an eye icon in SF symbol app. So if we open the SF symbols, I think we can search for the eye icon, and right here, so we can use I for when the password is visible, and we can use I/ if the password is not visible. So if we show password, if we are currently showing password, we show that it is visible. If it's not, we show that it is not visible. So right now, as you can see, it's not visible. So if I type it, it's not visible to the user on the UI. If I tap this button, now you can see the password. All right, great, it's working. So I also want to do a password strings check. So if the user's password does not contain some characters, etc., it will return false. So in this case, what we're gonna do is we're gonna add this state private var password security check passed, right? By default is false. So in this case, we are probably gonna check if there is a alphabet, if there is a uppercase letter, there's a lowercase letter, there's a number, and there's a special character. Now, unlike this case, previous case, we are checking for and. So basically, there is an uppercase character and there's a lowercase character and there's a number and there's a special symbol. So this is a good case to use regex, right? So we're gonna have a private function which I wrote before. So basically we have a lower number regex, which regular expression basically represents all the letter from lowercase a to z. This one represents all the letter from uppercase a to z. This one represents 0 to 9, and this number represents these characters. So exclamation mark, at, hashtag mark, etc. So then we write an as predicate which matches self, and basically it has to match this lowercase expression regex. So this string itself has to match this regex here. So it means it contains a lowercase letter, uppercase letter, number, and special characters. So now we will evaluate it against this password. So password becomes self. It has to match this regular expression. And then if it matches, it returns true. If it doesn't match, it returns false. And we also check for the length. So let's put it here, I think. Let's put it, the password check. Let's see, so here. Well, let's add an on change to here, right? So on change of password entry, we can perform the check. So self password security check passed equal to its secure password new value. Now we can actually just display this on the UI using the similar technique as shown above. So basically we can show a label, right? And then maybe like password security, and then we have a system image. So if password check passed, we show a check mark. If it doesn't pass, we can show an X mark, and we can modify the color. Now this is not very beautiful because it's just gonna show whether the check succeeded or not, but it's not like showing the progress. So what I want to do is like an uppercase, lowercase. Let me just show it to you. So 1 at, and then the length. So at, yep, here we go. So what we also want to do is we can show like a, I don't know, like a how strong your password is, like a meter, like that. So what we can do is we can provide the user with a score from 0% to 100%. So let's change this to a double. Once a condition is met, we can plus 1 to the score. So what we can do is say like password strings score. This is points, so when one condition is met, it will add 1 to that point. Here we can do, you know, for example, if password, if password.count is, .count is larger than or equal to 8, we can say password string score plus equals 1, you know, and if this, I'm just gonna paste these here first. So if right, if and if, okay, and basically just to do the same here, and at the end what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna return the so this has to be a double, right? Because we need to divide this number. So the totally, so this percentage is the password string score divided by total available score, total score points available. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 divided by 5. And this becomes a progress. So customer check progress, which is a double, right? At the beginning it's 0. So we have a progress here. We can use a gauge. That's a new stuff in iOS16. So we can use a value. So this is the password security check progress. And basically, we can just put this label here. So this one will pass the check if password security check progress equal to 1.0. So that means a secure password. Okay, so and this onChange, basically we set this to the progress, and bingo. So if we wait for it to render, we can see our password security is not very high. Now I can type a larger case number, all right, uppercase number, I'm sorry, and then a lowercase number, a special mark, and a number. Now the length doesn't match, so here we go. Now I can also add some animations. So by using the Viz animation block, so right here, what I can do is I can type C. Do you see the animation here? Yep. Sorry. So yeah, here we go. So yeah, that's the password gauge. Great. Now what's the next thing we want the user to enter? So for example, we can oh, by the way, so say if let's see if the username is only English characters, numbers, and underscore. And if the user types this failed, any keyboard could show on the screen. So for example, if the user is using a keyboard for the language other than English, it's gonna show their native keyboard, which contains characters you do not accept. So in this case, we can see keyboard type, and we can set it to ASCII capable. So this basically stands for all the English characters and all the numbers. So this is ASCII capable. There's also the auto correction disabled, which should be set to true, because username doesn't have to be perfect English words. Of course, you can also perform text input auto capitalization. So this basically capitalizes characters, the first letter of each sentence, the first character of each word. And in this case, we're gonna set it to never, because the user will control which character is capitalized. We apply the same for our password, so that the password fields are the same. All right. Great, so that's the username and password. Now let's have picking a location, right? So let's see. So this is the section. Here we go. Right, or location or address. We're gonna go with a more fashionable way for picking the planet of birth. Actually, this is personal information. So selection, so let's create a variable to store this value. So for example, planet of birth, right? By default, I believe most of the people are born on Earth, so let's do Earth. I'm just kidding. Okay, so let's put the place of birth here. Now the content, remember, this could be an enum, or like typically it's an enum, because picker picks one option from the many given options. So let's do an enum, planet of birth. The raw value is a string. So for example, we have Earth, we have Mars, we have maybe I don't know, like Jupiter, and we can have like out of solar system. So this is a case where the user will provide a custom value, right? So we also need to make this case iteratable, so you can get all the cases of this enum. All right, so here what we're gonna do is we're gonna have a for each that loops through all the possible options. So planet of birth, all cases, right? And then we need to provide an ID, because remember, this is a custom enum, so we have to provide an ID, and the ID is a raw value, which is the string. So this is actually Swift knowledge, so this string will automatically become this. So Earth, basically the raw value is just Earth. It's the same as your case label. So for each case, we have a planet ID, right, or planet name, and so maybe it's called planet ID. So we can display this planet ID here, right? And then we provided a tag. So a tag, as a review, is how picker identifies what to put in this selection. So if your tag is planet ID, when the user select that option in the picker, it saves that planet ID, which is defined in the tag, to the selection. So this is how it links the selection to this, right? Planet ID, by default, let's say it's Earth, right? So no exact call to initializer. This is because this is a custom enum, so we can either provide a raw value, or you can actually let's see, this can also be a raw value, or what you can do is you can provide a function here, for example, get localized planning name. Okay. So right now we're just gonna return raw value, but in this case you can also use a switch, and you can provide different so switch self, sorry. So here what you can do is you can provide like as localized string, so your app works in different language. Okay, but here we're just gonna return a raw value, which is the label right here. So right now you can see it works. So we can select different planets. What if the user is out of the solar system? Well, if instead of saving the string here, right, we might want to save this object directly. So it becomes easier to check which condition, which option the user selected. So we also have to modify this. So the tag now becomes the tag. The type of the tag has to match the type of the selection. So this one, you remove the raw value. So basically, the raw value is what is being shown to the user, or maybe the localized name is what is being shown to the user, and the tag is what is being saved to this variable. Okay, so if planet or birth equal to auto solar system, we will allow the user to enter a customized a customized planet name. Okay, so we will say like a text field, which planet were you born, right? And then customized planet name. All right, so now if I select auto solar system, you can enter a custom planet name. Awesome. So what else? So for example, this is basically if you ask the user to select the state or country, you can use a picker. So this is where you can use it for. Of course, selecting the planet of birth is not very common in apps these days, right? Okay, so this is that, and let's see what else. So for example, we ask the user to pick the birthday, right? So this is also personal information, so obviously that's the birth location. I'm wondering which app actually requires a birth location, like planet of birth, but this is just for demo. Maybe this is buying space tickets, I don't know, space travel tickets. So here we can have ask the user for a birthday or birth date, right? Date of birth, right? DOB. Okay, so this is a perfect chance to use DatePicker, right? So let's see. Private var, date of birth, right? Date. You need to provide default value. For example, this can be time interval since now, or time interval since, or you can provide a custom. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna deduct like maybe, I don't know, 20 years from the current date as the default value as a starting point. So basically, by adding year -20 to the current date, if this value is not available, which is rare, we default to this date. This is Swift knowledge, so if you use double question mark, it means this is a default value if this value is invalid or is nil. Okay, so here we will actually use a DatePicker. We'll set the displayed components. So you don't pick you usually don't pick the time of birth, right? Not a lot of people remember the time of birth unless you look at your birth certificate. So we're just gonna show like date of birth, and then this is maybe the date of birth, and then we only show the date, right? Here we go. Now it shows 20 years early and earlier, and then you can, the user can select the date for date of birth. All right, that's the DatePicker. Now, what other components can we can we utilize? So use TextField. Oh yeah, so we can ask whether the user wants to subscribe to our newsletter, for example. So this is marketing options, right? Now, this is a great case for using a toggle because there are only two cases. One is you want to subscribe, two is you do not want to subscribe. So let's see. So at subscribe, no, sorry. Subscribe to newsletter. By default, let's say it's true. A lot of websites do that. Now we have a toggle. Subscribe to monthly email. And then this is subscribe to newsletter. Here we go. So we can toggle this on and off. All right. Let's see. So let's see. We want to ask the user how many emails they want to receive every month. So that would be a great case for a slider because imagine we can have a maximum number of 4 emails every month, once a week, and then maybe to 1 email every month. That's a monthly. So here, I'll just add right number of emails to receive monthly. Right, by default is, for example, 2. So do know that we have to use a double here as illustrated in the video about slider. So slider accepts a double value, but you can make sure this is an integer, okay, by using a step parameter. So let's put it here. So marketing. So a slider, right? A slider. Now you have to use a step. So this is basically making sure that the user can only go the following step every time. So here, by setting step to 1, we can make sure it is an integer. Value is number of newsletters. The range is 0 to 4, and the step is 1. All right, so as you can see, we have the slider. Now let's just display the value user selected, maybe on the right side. So text, and now here is variable within string. So just use a slash and to the colon mark. So just use this to include variable in a string. This is sort of similar to this in JavaScript if you did web development. The number of emails, of course, we convert it to an integer because it is an integer, so emails. And here we go. So you can see the user can only select integer values. Okay, perfect. Let me think. So this is not actually a sign up form. This is more like reviewing all the possible or the most common form elements. Okay, so one more thing I want to do is image picker. So usually the user, actually, 2 more things. First is a user's self-introduction. Wait, so here's is a self-introduction. Now we have it here, for example. So self-introduction. Now, usually a self-introduction is contains multiple lines. Prior to iOS 16, what you can do is you can use a text editor. In this, it does not provide a placeholder. So in iOS 16, there's a new way where you can add an access of a text field. So self-introduction. Vertical, if you set it to vertical, so it has a placeholder, and then you can it expands as you type. So you type a super long string, it goes to a second line. All right, looks awesome. So that's the description. One more feature we're gonna do is a profile picker using the SwiftUI native photo picker. So do know that if you're using compiling a project prior to iOS 16, I recommend you checking out my GitHub repository about SwiftUI compatible. That one actually offers a photo picker that you can use for prior to iOS 16. You can go to my other GitHub account where I use a more funnier avatar. So it's github.com/AmazonMagic. So here you can see there's a SwiftUI compatible. So if you want to make sure your project also works prior to iOS16, you can use this PhotosPicker right here. Okay, so let's add a image packer. So let's basically I want to add it to the very top, for example. So let's see, profile image. Right, so we're gonna display a packer. So basically in iOS16 you can use the PhotosUI, and here it's just called a PhotosPicker. So as you can see, you can have a title and a selection. So selection here is a PhotosPicker item. So this is not the image object directly. You have to convert it to an image object, which we'll go over. So let's start this, and let's see, pick a profile picture. So this is a PhotosPicker item, and it's a binding. So by here we put it as a state variable. Right, so state private var profile picture selection PhotosPicker item. Notice the question mark, it's optional. Okay, so this is profile picture selection. Now the user will be able to select a picture, but right now we are not displaying it or processing it because it's a PhotosPicker item. So here it's an excellent case to use onChange. So onChange of profile picture selection. Okay, and then we're just gonna use a flat new value, right? So basically this means a flat new value equal to new value, but in the newest version of Xcode you can omit this part, so just a flat new value. So we can load the data from this image. So what we can do is we can just new value dot load transferable. So what this does is that it basically can load this into other type of objects. So for example, we can load it to a data object. Okay? So data.self. Right, and then basically this is an async call. So what we can do is that we can just do await, and of course we need to wrap this in a task, right? And this is a try. So right, if that this one, if that loaded image data, right, equal to try this. Now it's gonna prompt us to put this in yes, right? So it's gonna prompt us to put this in a task, so we can basically put this in a task. And the priority of this, let's say it's user initiated. All right, here we go. So once this image is loaded, we can apply it to the to a variable, right? So basically we can say profile picture data or profile picture object. So in this case we can use an UI image, right? And then here, so this is the data, right? Loaded image data. Now we can convert that to an UI image object, right? If you're familiar in UI kit programming. If you're not, it's totally fine. So let's learn right here. So data is the data of the image, but to display it we have to use an image object, right, that loads the binary data into an image. So for example, on iOS it's called UI image, and on macOS it's called NS image. But to display it in SwiftUI, you have to use image. So this is basically converting from data, right? Or actually this is beginning from the PhotosPicker item. We go from there, go to a data. Now we want to then convert it to a UI image, and then we wrap it with an SwiftUI image. This is how you can display. Now you can save that or the data to your disk. All right. So let's loaded image, the UI image data. Right. If you're on macOS, use NS image, the loaded image data. Now what I can do is basically self dot profile picture object equal to loaded image. Now I'm gonna display this image when the user select this. So if let profile image object, right, we can just show image UI image profile picture. Now we need to resize this so it fits the screen. So let's use resizable scale to fit. and limit a frame. So for example, 100, 100. Now I do want this, make this circular, right? Because circular is, or maybe a hexagon, I don't know. So let's make this circular. So here's a chance to use a clip shape, and you define shape. So for example, this is a circle, right? And basically this will, if we run this code right now, we can test how it shows. So this is what's good of SwiftUI. If you're unsure about your design, you can preview and design and code at the same time. So if you select this image, great, it works, and the clip shape is a circle. So I want to make it a little larger, so let's basically do 200, 200, and it's too large, right? 150, 150. And let's center this. So to center this, what you can do is you can put it in a VStack. By default, center alignment is what's used in a VStack. So now if we pack an image right here, this is not centered because in a VStack we have an image which only have this much width, but this button has this much width. So the width of the VStack is the width of the button. So in this case, what I can do is I can wrap this in HStack, and I can put two spacers. So this would basically center this, you know, and it would get displayed. All right. So that's for the profile image. Okay. Let's see what else. So we have the profile image, we have the username, we have password, we have personal information, we have description, we have marketing. I think that's pretty much it for our form design. One more thing, so the submit button. So we can wrap this in a navigation stack so that the button is always displayed at the top and always visible. So let's do a navigation stack. Now, I add the toolbar or the buttons, right, as a view modifier to the first element within the stack, within the navigation. So navigation stack, and the first element is a form. So I'm gonna hold my command key and click on this bracket. I'm gonna go to the bottom. This is bottom of this bracket, so I can add a toolbar, and I can define toolbar item, right, with a placement. So I'm gonna put it on the right. So this is trailing, navigation bar trailing. So here I can have a submit, right? Now you might not want the user to submit if they didn't pass this checks, right? So you can set disable to this button. So this button is not clickable when these conditions are not met. So button is not available if username check is not valid, right? Or if not, is username length valid, or not password, security check progress, or password security check progress is less than 1. So in this case, this button is not available, but if I meet all the conditions here, A at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now the submit button is available. Of course, you might also want to check if password verify also passes. It's the same as a password. Right? So that's a submit button. Now, one more thing. This view is very bulky. It's hard to find different parts of this view. So I want to take it out to different sections. Let's cut this one, profile image. Let's call this a profile image section. This is some view, right? As long as it conforms to view, it's possible the section conforms to view. Now, if you want to put multiple elements in there, you can put them in a group. I do want to point out that using a lot of people think that we can use any view, but so according to Apple's videos, any view basically erases the type of your underlying views, which can cause performance issues. So don't use any view. If you can avoid it, just avoid it. Okay. So we have a section here for the profile image, and we can basically add it here. Yeah, and basically you can do the same for the rest of the part. So we have a username section. Right, which will be put here. we have a password section, and yeah, you get the point. So we can put that into different parts. So, and we can provide a navigation title, sign up. And then this is too large. I just want to show a very small navigation title. So we can do a display style, display mode with an inline. So inline basically makes sure it only shows on the top. Perfect. This is our sign-in form. So this video basically reveals what we have learned in the previous videos, and this is all part of my Udemy course. So please, I hope you're having fun so far learning SwiftUI, because I definitely did. I remember the first time I was trying SwiftUI a few months after it was announced. I was working on open source software, and then the contributor of that software actually used SwiftUI. So I was kind of going through the SwiftUI codes and just modify different sections and see what happens in the preview, what happens in the simulator preview. And gradually I find it a very quick and efficient tool for design, because previously I had to use XIB or storyboards or generate UI with codes, which takes time. Imagine that your app's core functionality should be your focus, not not working on storyboards. The UI is very important, but you should not waste your time dragging around different components in a storyboard, or setting up auto layout. So what you should do is you should use SwiftUI to speed up your time of development. Okay, so yeah, that's our sign up form. Good luck on your learning, and I'll see you in the next video.